Now I would like to welcome Mr. David Gardner, who will be presenting on .NET and developer enthusiasm with it. Since .NET 7 is released with lots of improvements, so we will see how with him, like what are the things we can do with this, and we can continue our enthusiasm. So let's welcome Mr. David here. Mm, David, you can share, Mr. David, you can share your screen. I'll just arrange the content for live.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to being with you today, wherever you are. And yeah, it's great to be a part of this event. So yeah, my talk today is on a new feature in .NET 7 about support for containers. So let's jump into that. So briefly about me, you've heard a little bit of introduction, but yeah, I'm a senior developer at 6pivot here in Australia, MVP, and I run the Adelaide.NET user group. I'm based in Adelaide in South Australia, and there's my online details, my blog, Twitter handle, and Mastodon handle. So yeah, do reach out to me if you've got questions later on. So, but before we go too far, I think it's worth stopping and just thinking, what is the problem we're trying to solve with containers, and why are they adding this support into .NET 7? So what is a container? What does it do? What does it help us with? So I think one of the main things that containers can help us with is solving the problem that it works on my machine. So I've written an application, it works great on my computer, and I go and deploy it onto the server and it doesn't work. And there could be any of number of reasons why it's not working. It might be because I've got a different version of the compiler on my computer compared to what ran on our CI/CD system. It could be that there's a different file system layout on the server compared to my local machine. It could be that there's some different firewall rules, some different network ports that need to be opened that are fine on my computer but not on the server. All those kind of things. Or it just could be a third-party library that I've got installed but I forgot to install on the server, and my application requires that library. So containers can help with that. And the way they can do that is that a container is basically a sandbox process. It's at the process level. So we've got our bare metal servers, we've got a virtual machine, and they're all pretty heavyweight ways to deploy software. To spin up a brand new machine, you've got to go buy the server and build it and set it up. A virtual machine is a bit faster, but it can still take quite a few minutes to deploy a new virtual machine, even in a cloud environment. But a container can be spun up in a matter of seconds. So they're a lot faster to deploy because they're really running at a process level. So they run on top of some kind of engine. So Docker is a common one, which runs on top of your host operating system. So they can run on top of Linux or Windows or Mac OS as well. They can they're portable. So the thing that I run on my machine in a container is exactly the same thing that I end up running on the server or in the production environment. So it helps remove that problem that there's a difference on my machine compared to where it's getting run at remotely. So containers help that whole problem and sort of solve that problem by making it just all go away, that we're deploying the same thing everywhere. And a container it's an image that's being run. And so it's worth just spending a moment understanding what is an image inside a container. So here I've got a screenshot of looking at the Microsoft ASP.NET 7 image, a container image, and it's got a number of layers. So a container image basically is a number of snapshots as we make changes to that image. And so we can dig into that image and see what went into that. And so we've got things like adding files, setting our shell, running updates, installing libraries, setting environment variables, setting symbolic links, So we can see all that history, and then if we want to customize that, so that's just a vanilla ASP.NET 7 environment, but we want to add our application on top of that, then we add another layer to that image. And then because those layers get cached, it means that we don't have to download all that every time. That base image is probably going to be around 200 meg. I've already downloaded that on my machine, so the next time I use that image and add my application on top of it, it doesn't need to download 200 meg. It just needs that little tiny diff of the last changes to add my application on top of the image. And so we get our image. That's our snapshot of our file system. We then run. We run it locally. We can also run it remotely and deploy it into different environments onto a server. It could be just running as a container instance, or it could be using something like Kubernetes to run lots of containers and have them managed and scaling in and out as our demand requires. Okay, so that's a bit of a background of what containers are and what they can do for us. Let's find out now what we can do with containers with .NET. So I'm going to jump over to my terminal window. I've got a empty directory here, and I'm going to create a new .NET application. And so a new web. Oops, let's spell new web app. And so I'm going to create a new web application. I'll just bump that font up a little bit larger. And I don't need HTTPS. So I'm just doing that from the console. And I can do .NET run. And if I spelled it correctly, it would even work. And that's going to build. So it's going to compile the application, which is it's a really simple web application. So it's going to build that, and it's going to run it locally. So I'm not running this inside a container. It's just running as a process. If I click on that link, it's launched a browser window. I'll bring that over to my screen. And so there's my browser window there. So there's my web app 15 running. So that's all fine. So how can I turn this into a container? Well, in pre.NET 7, this is how we would do it. So we're going to have a look at the current support prior to .NET 7, and then we'll look at what .NET 7 adds. So to make a container, previously I'd have to create a Docker file. So I've launched VS Code, and I need to add some things to my Docker file. And this is what Docker, the tools that I've got running to create my containers, will use to understand what goes into my container image. So the first thing I'm going to type in is from, so mcr.microsoft.com.net and SDK and 7.0 as build. So that's going to pull down, if I don't have it, it'll pull down that image from the internet. Fortunately, I've already got that one locally, so I won't need to wait for me to download that. The next thing I'm going to do is set a working directory. And then you'll see I've got the default files here that were created by the .NET New. And so I need to bring in my csproj file. So I'm going to copy my star.csproj into the current directory. So just the csproj file, not anything else yet. And now I've got that, I can now do a run .NET restore. And now I've restored any dependencies, so that'll bring in any sort of runtime or any NuGet packages that I need. And now I'm ready to build the application. So first of all, I'll copy the rest of the files in, and then I'll run. I could do a .NET build, but I'll do .NET publish, and I'll do a release configuration. I'll go set the output to out there. And so that's now built my application. And so now I'd really like to make my image as small as possible. So I'm going to use a multi-stage Docker file. So I'm going to set another from here. So mcr.microsoft.net. And then rather than SDK, I just want the runtime. I don't need all the build tools anymore. So I'll say ASP.NET 7.0. And so I did my compilation in the previous stage. So I'll copy those over into this stage. And so from stage build and from out to app. Now I forgot a step here. I do need to set a work dir here as well. And finally, I'd need to indicate this image. What's it actually going to do? What's the thing that's going to run when we sort of start up this image? So I can say .NET, and the assembly name is going to be webapp15.dll. So there's our Docker file. Now, just to explain, why did I have a separate step with my CS_proj file and .NET Restore? Because as we saw previously, a Docker file or an image in a container image is made up of layers, and most of these steps here in the Docker file will correspond to adding another layer. So what this means is that by having a separate .NET Restore here, that will get added as a layer and it'll be cached locally. So then later on, if I make a change, if I add another CS file, but I don't change the CS_proj file, Docker will realize actually nothing's changed here. This file is the same as it was before. So I don't need to do any extra work. So I can just reuse the existing cached layers, skip over that and move on to the next step. And then I might have to reevaluate these commands. So we're going to make sure that we benefit from any layer caching there. So I've got that. I'm going to jump back to my command line and I'm going to build a Docker image. So I'm going to run Docker build from the current directory, and I'm going to add the tag command there, and I'll just say the tag is going to be webapp15 and latest. So let's see if I typed everything correctly. So you didn't need to wait for me to download the images. That was really fast. It did the .NET Restore. It's now doing the .NET Publish. What I ideally should have done there is actually said on the publish line, and I'll do that because then we can run it again. No restore. I don't need to do a restore again. So that did work, but I'll run it again. We'll actually see that it skipped over that. You'll see that stage there. It all took 0 seconds, so it didn't need to reevaluate that. It is reevaluating this line because I've changed it. There we go. So we've now got a Docker image created, and so now I can run it. So I can Docker run, and I'm going to launch my web app. So it's web15 latest. That's the one that it's created. I'm also doing something here where I'm mapping the ports. So we remember when we ran the application locally, it chose a sort of random port. With my Docker file, I know this application is going to listen on port 80, but on my host machine, it's already set. It's a Windows machine. It's already running IIS on port 80, so that's not going to work. So instead, we're mapping from port 80 inside the container to port 5000 on my host machine. So if I do Docker run, we'll see that the output here is from inside the container. So the container thinks it's listening on port 80. But Docker is then mapping that to port 5000. If I jump back to my browser window and bring that back into view, and I'll change that to 5000. And there we go. Webapp15 is working there. So that's now running inside a container. So that's nice. So that's how we would have done that previously using .NET 6. We could do it that way. The other thing we could do is use Visual Studio. So if I jump over to Visual Studio 2022 here, I could do File, New Project, and I'll just create an empty .NET Core application here through the UI. That's fine. And then we have the option here. We can click Enable Docker, and I could choose .NET 7 here. We can choose which operating system we want to target. It could be Linux or it could be Windows, and hit create. And we'll let that create a new project for us. So this is exactly the same as what you have had prior to .NET 7. So it's created a Docker file for us. So let's open that Docker file and see how's that compared to the one that we just created ourselves. So it's actually pretty similar. It does have a few extra stages here. But by and large, it's the same thing. So we've got our base image there for ASP.NET. We've got our SDK one there. So you can see it's doing a similar thing where it's copying the CS.proj file and doing the .NET restore on the CS.proj file. Then we bring in the rest of the files. Then we do, it actually does a .NET build as a separate step. I don't know, I don't see a huge advantage to that. Then we do a .NET publish in a separate stage. And then there's our final copying the build application in and then the entry point set there. Pretty much the same thing as what we wrote. So yeah, that's another way to do it. And the nice thing about using Visual Studio is that we could actually hit F5 or click the button up here in the toolbar, and the application would run inside a container, and we'd be able to debug that application with Visual Studio. So if for whatever reason, say your application's running inside a Linux container and you'd made some assumptions about file paths with backslashes versus forward slashes, then you'd be able to debug that problem and fix it and test it out because you'd be able to debug in Visual Studio. So yeah, quite nice integration there. Okay, so that's what we've had until now. What about what's new in .NET 7? Well, let's find out. So I'm going to jump out of here. I'm going to create a new application. 16 we're up to now. And so .NET, new web app, same thing again. But this time we're not going to create a Docker file. What we're going to do instead is we're going to add a NuGet package. And so we're going to add a package reference to Microsoft.net.build.containers. And now, once that package has been added, we can do .NET publish. And we've got some extra parameters here. So we've got --os Linux, --arch x64, and we're doing a release configuration. And also we've got a /p, so we're setting a property publish profile to default container. So let's run that. And that's going to do a build. It does a restore and then a build and then a publish as per normal. And now we get this extra thing after our build and publish step. It says building image web app 16 with tags 1.00 on top of a base image, which is that ASP.NET 7 base image, just like we were using in our Docker file. And that seems to have created an image. In fact, if I list the images on my machine, we'll see, sure enough, there's web app 16. There's also web app 15 we made earlier. Web app 16 with a tag 1.00. So can I run that? Let's see if I can. So I'll change that to 16 and 1.0.0. And I'm doing that port mapping again. And let's jump over to our browser. Does it, what's it going to load? That's the old page. If I press refresh now, oh, there we go, web app 16. So we've now got an application running inside a container, and we didn't have to write a Docker file. All we had to do was add a package reference. That's pretty nice. Okay, what about Visual Studio? Can we do it here as well? Let's try that out. So I'm going to create a new project again. And this time I won't enable Docker here. And now we've got our application there. There's no Docker file. I'm going to right click on the project and choose publish. And we get the choice here of different targets. One of them is a Docker container registry. I'm going to select that option. And then I'm going to choose, in this instance, I'm going to choose Azure Container Registry. I could choose Docker Hub or another container registry. And then I need to select an instance of an Azure Container Registry. I do happen to have one of those set up ready to use. And I'm already logged into my Azure subscription. And then I get a choice. I can either choose between Docker Desktop with a Docker file, which is basically what we saw earlier, creating our own with a Docker file, or using the .NET SDK without a Docker file. And that's what we're going to have a look at now. So hit finish. And it's ready to publish. And indeed, I could try and publish that to Azure Container Registry. I'll show you what it's done to the project. Interestingly, it didn't actually add a package reference here. When I use Visual Studio, it adds this extra property, and this is new in the very latest Visual Studio preview. So I'm running the preview edition of Visual Studio 2022, the very latest version, which was, there was an update that came out a few days ago. This is the change that's been made, and that will automatically bring in that package reference. However, and this is the interesting bit, it brings in an older version of a package reference, and that older version has some bugs and it has some missing features. So I'm not going to use that version to deploy this package to Azure Container Registry. What I'm going to do is comment that out and manually add in the package reference. So I can just type that in. And I could go through the NuGet Package Manager UI if I wanted to. Include equals. In fact, I might do that. I think it's going to be quicker. So let's add our package reference here. Go to browse, and I've looked for that one before. And that one, version 0.32, got updated just in the last 24 hours. So this is a newer update, and it's slightly out of sync with the preview version. I think I left some stuff there. I did, didn't I? Get rid of that. Yeah, so the preview version of Visual Studio 2022 is just, even though that was updated earlier this week, the version of this package is more recent. So we're kind of working around a bit of a bug here that eventually will be solved. It's a temporary thing because this NuGet package that's implementing this feature is being actively worked on. And in fact, when I did this talk early this week to my own team, I had to use the nightly build of the package. And there is instructions on the GitHub site on how to access the nightly build feed. But this update came out overnight, and so that should be good to go. Now, I'm going to try and hit publish. If it doesn't work, then I'll need to restart Visual Studio because sometimes it locks a version in memory. So I'm going to hit publish and just check the output window. And if that doesn't error straight away, we'll let that keep running because it will take a while to push it up to the Azure Container Registry. That's looking promising. I'm going to let that keep running. I'll actually, while that's running, I will just quickly bring over this window, another browser window here. So here is my container registry. You'll see, I'll just hit refresh there. There is no web application 14 here at the moment, but we'll come back there a bit later. And when this is finished, it takes about 4 or 5 minutes to run. So we won't sit and watch that run now. We'll have a look at some other stuff while we're doing that. Okay, let's jump back to command line. So I'm going to launch VS Code because we've seen it just running in the default settings at the moment. So we've got, it just created an image called web app 16 with a tag of 1.0.0. So it sounds like those are the kind of things that would be nice to be able to customize. And normally you would have done that either through your Docker file or through your build process. So fortunately, we can customize those things by adding in some properties in our project file here. So we can do container, image name, and so instead of web app 16, we might want to call it super app. because I think it's pretty super. Our tag, we might want to customize that as well. So container image tag, and instead of 1.0.0, you might want to say latest, and hit save on that. And if I jump back to my command window and I do .NET publish, and we'll see that the process is pretty much the same, but now it's building image super app with tags latest, which is good. Now, often with Docker images, we actually want multiple tags. So we might want latest, but also a particular version number. So if we pluralize this property, then we can add multiple values in here. So I might have version 1.0.1, and I would say normally you wouldn't hard code that. You'd probably have some kind of version number system. So something like Git version or Git versioning is my favorite to generate that number for you. So if I do .NET publish now, then we should see both of those tags and basically two images created. It's one for latest, one for 101. Now this is something that if I'd shown you this demo yesterday, prior to that latest version of the NuGet package, this actually didn't work. So this is a bug that was being fixed, and it was fixed in the nightly builds, and now that there's a new public update to the NuGet package, then that just works. If I was using the Visual Studio preview version, that would still bring in the older version, so you wouldn't be able to use this feature. So we're sticking with the latest version, which is 0.3.2 as of today. We can also set things like the base image name if we wanted to change that to a custom image rather than the Microsoft ASP.NET image. And we can also change the container working directory. So it defaults to app, I believe, but if we wanted it to be a different working directory, we could set that there as well. There's other things we can change, and they're not properties, they're item groups. So I can create a separate item group here, and then we can go container port, and then we can say the port number. So I didn't actually show this in the Docker file, but we can add an expose statement and indicate what ports we want this container to declare that it's going to be using. So TCP, and so it might be that your application actually listens on multiple ports. So you might listen on port 80, and I don't know, 443 is another popular one. The interesting thing about Docker is that this is just metadata. There's no guarantee that your application is listening on these ports. It's really just an indication that it likely is, and it's really just a hint. So there's no kind of validation that, but it's a clue that you really should have those ports available and yeah, be available for use. So we can, because it's an item rather than a property, we can include that multiple times to declare each port that we're using. Likewise, we can add labels to our image. So we can do container label, and so include is the label name. So that could be something like organization, and then the value is the value of that label. So that my company could be 6pivot, or it could be the name of your company. We could add other labels that might reference things like the Git repository that the application came from, the build number that this build was running under. So that kind of extra metadata can be really useful to add to an image when we want to be able to add some traceability for where something is running. Where did it actually come from? So we can add multiple labels. We can add environment variables as well. So container environment variable. And again, we include the variable name. So, and the value. Shh, it's a secret value. Don't tell anyone. Okay, and so we can set those. And so let's jump back and build our image again with those extra properties and items set. And then what we'll actually do is we'll have a look at an image to see where those things are set. So we can do Docker inspect, and we're going to Docker inspect our image, which is super app and latest. And it basically outputs a JSON blob, which is sort of the metadata of our image. And so if we scroll up here, we've got a label section there. And so we can see there's our organization label that we described. There's also another one here we didn't add. It was added for us, which is just a date stamp for when the image was created. If we scroll up here, we can see the environment variables that have been set. There's a number that have been set for us, some to do with .NET. But there's the one I set as well. And likewise, here's the ports. So we've indicated this image is going to listen on port 443 and port 80 on for TCP. So yeah, some extra stuff there that otherwise you would need to set those in your Docker file. We don't have a Docker file, so we can just set them in project properties. Cool. Okay, let's jump back to Visual Studio and see whether it's finished publishing, and it has. Okay, cool. Let's jump back to my browser window. I've got so many windows here. Not that one. That one. Hit refresh. And there we go. So there's our image. It's been uploaded to my container registry. It's got one tag on at the moment, and we can see there's some layers in there as well. Not a lot of extra information we get in Azure Container Registry, but it's there. So we could then use that, deploy that to a Azure App Service or into Kubernetes, or just pull it back down to our workstation again if we needed to. So yeah, that's sort of basically demonstrated deploying that application to Azure Container Registry. There are other registries that are supported, so we can push it to GitLab Container Registry, Google Cloud Artifact Registry. There's another registry called key.io. That's key spelled Q-U-A-Y.io. AWS is just been added support in the last few weeks, and actually was some of the AWS engineers that contributed to that feature, which is nice to see. GitHub packages has been added. I've had some problems myself using that, but the development team, it seems to work for them. So I'm still in discussions with them as to why that might be. The one that is sort of currently missing from that list is Docker Hub. So I think they're still working on that. If that may actually even be fixed in the latest release, I'm not sure, but if not, then it will be fixed pretty soon because they're definitely actively working on things. So yeah, so it's not just Azure Container Registry. And just to show you that, they did create a published profile here. I can open the one in this project. There's the profile there. And so yeah, you could just change that to point to a different container registry if you didn't want to use the Azure one. That would be another option. Okay, now we've seen using the container SDK from the command line. We've seen it in Visual Studio. What about adding it to our CI/CD, our continuous integration, our continuous deployment solution? So it could be GitHub or Azure Pipelines or any other kind of system we've got. What's involved with that? Let's jump back to command line. And what I've done, I've got I've cloned a Git repo that the development team that created the container SDK also created a demo repo. I've cloned that and created a branch, and I've customized that to my own credentials. And we'll have a look at that in VS Code as well. And just to compare the two build pipelines. So first of all, we'll have a look at a build pipeline here, which is a typical one. So this is a GitHub action, but it's not that dissimilar to an Azure pipeline. where what we're doing a checkout, then we're ensuring we've got the .NET SDK installed, and then we're logging into our container registries. Interestingly, this one here, I'm logging into two different ones. I'm logging into the Azure Container Registry, and so I've got the server name, my username, and I'm passing in a personal access token that I've set up in my GitHub repo in the project settings. And I'm also logging into GitHub packages here as well. And to do that, I just use my GitHub token. So different kind of configuration. So two different container registries. I then need to run this step, which extracts some metadata. And then I use another action here, which is a Docker build push action. So that will runs Docker build from the current directory, and then it will push up to both of those different repos from the one action, which is sort of nice and convenient. So that's if we were using a traditional Docker build with a Docker file. If we weren't using a Docker file, if we were using our container SDK, then this is the kind of sort of build pipeline that we might look at. So again, we've got our checkout, we've got our .NET SDK set up there. This pipeline is actually set up with different jobs rather than running everything in the one job. So I'm just doing one login here, logging into container registry, and then here's my .NET publish. So we've seen this already a number of times from the command line. So .NET publish, and the only slight difference here is rather than publish profile equals default container, I've got Azure as the publish profile, and that corresponds to a file here under the properties publish profiles subdirectory. So I open the azure.pubxml file, and you'll see it's a bit shorter than one we saw in Visual Studio, but that just contains the extra properties that we need to set so that it can publish the image back to Azure Container Registry. Likewise, if we wanted to publish to GitHub packages, there's a separate publish profile there for that one. And you can even just publish it locally to the local Docker instance. So there's examples of that one as well in this particular repo. But the pipelines are pretty similar, but if anything, the container SDK pipeline is slightly simpler. There's sort of one less step there. So we still have a login, but just as the .NET publish, and that does all the work for us. So yeah, just makes it a little bit easier to maintain. Okay, now we've seen web applications. One thing we haven't seen is non-web applications. So, but before we wrap up, we'll just see what we can do with non-web applications. So I'm going to make the console 5 and make a new application, new console application. And I mean, the console application by default just prints out hello world. So it's not that complicated. Even I can understand that. So let's make a container. So we do what we did before. We do .NET add package Microsoft.net.build.containers, add a reference to that package, and then we'll do a .NET publish and run that. And it does a restore, does a build, and it didn't build our image. Where's our image? What's going on? Well, because it's not a web application, we need to add an extra parameter there. So .NET publish, and the extra parameter is a /t for target and publish container. So we need to tell MS Build to use a particular build target. If we do that, then it will build our image, which there we go. And it also uses a different base image. So it doesn't use the ASP.NET base image, it uses .NET runtime. So we've now got our image built, and so let's Docker run, and I don't need a port. I just need, because there's no ports listing, so I just change that to Docker 5, console 5, and run that, and hello world. And there we go, that came from our application. So we can run non-web applications in a container. We just need to add that extra parameter into the /t : publish container. to our .NET Publish. But otherwise, we've still got access to all the same properties to customize the image as well if we need to. Okay, so with that, we're sort of wrapping up the talk. We've got about 5 minutes to go. So I'll jump back to my slides. I'll push everything out the way. So the prerequisites are that we need to be using .NET 7 SDK or higher. So you could still target an earlier framework version, but you need to be using the .NET 7 SDK. And we need to add a reference to that container package, either via Visual Studio, and I would expect the next preview update they'll fix that problem where it's pulling in the wrong version. So I'd probably hold off on using that until the next preview comes out. We need to have Docker installed. Even though it's not creating a Docker file for us, it's still using Docker under the covers to build the image. Whether that changes in the future and you could actually build a Docker image without having Docker installed, I'm not sure. I know someone has raised that as a feature request in the repo. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see whether that's something they do or not. You do need to add the package reference. So here was some of the commands we used in the demo just now. So you do need to add that package reference, but that also may go away in the future. So this functionality may be rolled into the .NET SDK. So you may not have to add a separate package reference. For now, it is a separate package and it has a separate project on GitHub. But yeah, whether it gets rolled back into the full .NET SDK, that'll be interesting to see. I think for now it makes sense to be separate. They're iterating very quickly on it, so they're able to release new versions quite frequently and nightly builds as well. So some resources to leave with you. We've got the blog post that announced this feature initially, and there's also our link there to the GitHub repo where the active development of this feature is happening. And so yeah, even as I've done this talk and practiced this over the last couple of weeks, it's been changing and the bugs are being fixed and features are being added. So it's getting it's got a lot of momentum behind it. So in sort of wrapping up, if your Docker file is really simple, then this could be something worth looking at to just eliminate the Docker file altogether. You may not need it. This might be good enough to generate a container image for you. If your Docker file is more complicated, then you're probably best sticking with what you're doing already. But this is a really nice approach to just removing some extra noise that you don't need to be there if it's just a nice simple case of just a simple web app or a simple other application just needs to be wrapped inside a container. Okay, that's it from me. If there are any questions, I'm happy to respond to those. Otherwise, we've got an extra couple of minutes. So yeah, hope that was interesting.
Sorry, I was muted. So yeah, it was really a nice session, and I learned several things. And yes, the approach is really good if we are using the new versions, and also it's easy to create a Docker files with the this setup. So yes, that's really a good approach, and I think many developer will love to do this because instead of spending and putting some extra effort, this could be one of the easy way to for them for following this Docker file.
That's right. Yeah, if you don't need the complexity, then why have to deal with it? Just make it go away. But alternatively, if you do, then that's fine. Yeah, so it's just a choice to consider.
Yes. So I don't see any question from audience. So then I think we can move to our next session as well. Thank you once again for such a nice session, and hope to see you again in the future for some events, and we'll believe like